Do you recall the verb powo, which means stop? It's set out for you here in black and red. The black is for the stem. That's the part of the verb that never changes. Pow, and it's connected to the English word pause. The endings in red tell you who does the verb. Omega or O for the first person. Powo means I stop. Ace is the second person, and that's you singular stop. Powace, you stop. Then it's pow-a for he, she or it stops. Pow-omen for we stop. Pow-ete for you, plural stop. And pow-usi or pow-usin for they stop. The new, the letter N at the end of pow-usi, is optional and only applied if the next word begins with a vowel or if the word comes at the end of a sentence. Now those are the endings of the present tense. I'm now going to show you how Greek makes a future tense from the present. Well, what we need to do is we need to insert between the stem and the ending another letter. So let's make a bit of space between the stem and the ending and write in the extra letter. The extra letter is a sigma, and I'm going to put it in blue. So if I put a sigma between pow and o, I make the word pauso, and I've now made the future tense, first person singular, I will stop. Now I need to do that to all the other forms of the verb. So pauseis is you, singular, will stop. Pausei becomes he or she or it will stop. Pausomen, we will stop. Pausete, you plural stop. And paususin is a third person plural, meaning they will stop. So the rule then for making the future from the present is to insert a sigma between the stem and the ending to make the future tense. Now this rule can be applied to any verb. If the stem of the verb ends in a vowel, then it's very straightforward indeed. We've seen powo become pauso for the future. Then luo, which means I release, becomes luso for the future. And if I give you a new verb which I haven't shown you yet in this course, koluo, which means I hinder or I impede, I delay. It's used quite often in military texts that we often have in ancient Greek literature. And I will hinder becomes koluso. Just have to watch out for that sigma between the stem and the ending as a mark that we're in the future. But what if the stem does not end in a vowel but ends in a consonant? Here's a verb that you've already seen before. Pempo. A pempo means I send. If I wanted to make the future, I will send, and I follow the rule that you've learnt so far, I would write the stem, and then I'd add a sigma, and then I'd put the ending on. I will send. Well, I've now replicated the sound of the word. The Greeks, we assume, would have said pempso. But I haven't got the spelling right. That's not how it will be written. And that's because when a pi and a sigma come together, the Greeks didn't write it as two letters because they already have a letter for pi sigma. Pi and sigma are written as this letter here, which we call a letter psi, and we transliterate it as PS in English. Now that is the letter that is used in the future of pempo. So I send becomes pempso. So it's important with Greek to be aware of different letter combinations. Let's go through a few of them. As we've seen, a pi plus a sigma makes and is usually written as a psi. Let's try a few more. A kappa, a k sound, plus a sigma gives us a sound which in English we would write as an X, and for the Greeks was the letter xi. The same sound, xi, can be made if you combine a gamma with a sigma. If you consider in English that some people pronounce the letter X as a x sound, as though it's made from K and S, and sometimes as a g sound, some people say exit rather than exit, then you will understand that xi in Greek could be the combination of kappa and sigma and gamma and sigma. Now let's apply these rules to some actual Greek verbs. You've met the verb dioko, which means I pursue or I chase. To make the future, we write the stem, diok, we add the future sigma, and we add the ending, again, omega. But we take the kappa and the sigma together and we write them as one letter. So the future of dioko is dioxo, written with a xi. Let's take another one. This is a new verb you've not yet met, which is ago, I lead. You notice because it begins with a vowel, I have to put a breathing over the first letter, and this is a smooth breathing, so I say ago, not hago. Well, to make the future, again, because the stem ends in a gamma, and the future marker is a sigma, and the ending is omega, I have to rewrite it by combining the letters gamma and sigma to make a xi, haxo. To these two, I'm also going to add another new word, fulasso. Fulasso means I guard. Now, if I'm going to make the future of I guard, I would start with the stem, fulas. I then have to add the future sigma, to which I add the ending. But what that would give me is 3 sigmas in a row. The Greeks didn't like that. In fact, in English, we don't have any words with 3 s's in a row. But by combining all those sigma sounds, Greeks saw fit to write them again with a xi. So the future of I guard in Greek is fulaxo, I will guard. Now, to make a bit more space, let's now make room for a few more examples. You've already seen that pempo, I send, becomes pempso in the future, using a psi as a result of combining the pi at the end of the stem and the sigma for the future. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing with another verb that you've already met. The verb is grapho, and it means I write. Remember that this one is the root behind words such as graphite, or the suffix graphy in words like geography. The stem of grapho ends in the letter phi, but phi is really a form of the letter pi with a sort of breathing attached to it. So it's close enough to pi to have the same rule apply as applied to pempo. When we're making the future of grapho, we take the stem graph, we add the sigma for the future, and we combine those letters again to make a psi. The future of grapho is therefore grapso. Now, are you ready for one more? If I make a bit of space, I'll show you one more verb which applies the future sigma in an interesting way. This is the verb peitho. And the verb patho means I persuade. To make the future of patho, we take the stem, which here ends in a theta. We add our future marker sigma before adding the ending. What you've got there is something which is very difficult to say, patho. And it's cumbersome and it's difficult to say without spitting on people. And the Greeks, in their infinite wisdom, decided simply to get rid of the theta before adding the future marker sigma. So I will persuade is peso. So that's one which behaves a little differently and perhaps not one which you could have guessed. So when you see a future tense in a text that you're reading, you may recognise it from the sigma before the ending, or you may recognise it from the fact that there is a psi or a xi before the ending, but it's not immediately obvious to you what the last letter of the stem is. You may have to try a few different ideas. You may have to look up a stem ending in a kappa or a gamma. You may have to look up a stem ending in a pi or a phi. So you may have to spend quite a lot of time with your dictionary when you're looking up the word. It's time now to leave verbs to one side for a moment and concentrate on nouns. You've met nouns which belong to the first declension, that's the first group of nouns, and some other nouns which belong to the second declension, the second group. And they're grouped in different declensions so that you can see the pattern that each one follows, because all nouns will follow the pattern of their group in the way they change their endings. Now I'm going to look at the first declension first today, even though it's slightly more complicated than the second. Now the first declension is a little bit more complicated because it might end in the letter eta, such as the word niker, which means victory, or timer, which means honour. Two things very important, of course, to the ancient Greeks. But it might end in an alpha, such as oikia, which means house, or Sophia, like the girl's name, which means wisdom. So you'll see when you look at the first declension that occasionally the ending eta is seen and occasionally it's the ending alpha. And there are reasons, in fact, why sometimes it's eta and sometimes it's alpha, reasons which we can look into later. But for the moment, expect to see either eta or alpha in the endings of the first declension. And then we have second declension nouns, and they're a little bit more uniform because they always end in os. And here are some examples which we've already seen. As a reminder, there's logos, which means word, can also mean story or reason or account. It's a very commonly used word. And then angelos, which means messenger, doulos, which means slave, and hippos, which means horse. We saw in the last lesson how nouns in Greek are accompanied by a definite article. That's a word meaning the. Now, if you're familiar with Latin, you'll know one thing about Latin is it doesn't have a word for the. And so nouns appear without a definite article, and you have to work out from yourself from the sentence whether you should say the before it or not. Now, in Greek there is a word for the, and that will vary according to the gender of the noun. So we're going to have a look in a moment at the different endings for each noun. We're going to learn how nouns work in Greek, and we're going to be meeting the definite article together with the noun as we go. So we will start with the first declension. So we're going to start with the first declension, and I'm going to draw a table to show you all the different forms that a first declension noun might take. And I suggest that you draw the table with me to make your own version of it, which is a good way to cement them in your mind to help you to learn them. Or alternatively, if you have a textbook and you have a reference grammar to hand, you might want to look at that reference grammar and to look at that table as we go. Well, first of all, I'm going to draw a vertical line to separate the singular forms of the word from the plural. Then I'm going to create four horizontal rows for the 4 cases which we're going to study today. There are 5 cases in Greek, but the 5th is used so rarely that I'm going to ignore that one for today's lesson, but introduce the 4 key cases. The first one is the nominative case, which I usually shorten to nom, but as this is early days, I will write out the whole word nominative. And that's actually called the naming case. It's the case which is used if you look the word up in a dictionary or index. It's a case which is used for the subject of the sentence. Then we have the accusative case, and that's used primarily, in fact, for the object of a sentence. So, for example, if you might want to say the general seeks victory, the word victory will be in the accusative case. The general will be in the nominative case because he's a subject. The accusative is also used after some prepositions, so we find it quite a lot. We're also going to meet the genitive case. Now, the genitive case is one of the few cases that English has. Whenever we add an apostrophe S to a word in English, we are adding a genitive ending, because the genitive means of or belonging to. That's its principal meaning anyway. And our final case is the dative case. You use the dative if you're giving something to somebody, so it means to or for, but it has got other uses as well. And you may notice that if you're familiar with Latin, that there is no ablative case in Greek. If you are looking for an ablative, you're not going to find one. So again, this is if you're familiar with Latin, the dative in Greek fulfills quite a lot of the functions of an ablative in Latin. So we close off our table after 4 cases. That's all we need to know. That's plenty for the moment. Now each time I'm going to give you the definite article to go with the word. Most first declension nouns are feminine, so the definite article I'm going to give you is the feminine version of the word for the, which in the nominative singular is hair. And then the model word that I'm going to use is timer, which means honour, so hair timer. And that becomes, in the accusative case, ten, to use the word for the in the feminine, ten timen. In the genitive, I want to say of the honour, it's tes times. And for the dative, if I want to say to or for the honour, then it will look rather different. Te time. And what you see now is a tiny iota just underneath the eta. We call that an iota subscript. The story is that in very early Greek, that iota would have been written after the eta. And in fact, you do see in Homer, for example, that is the dative ending of the, te. And as time went on, it became the thing to write it underneath the eta, like that. We call it an iota subscript because it's subscript, it is underneath another letter. It's fairly rare in Greek, actually, to find an iota subscript, and most often it's used in the dative case. So it's really handy for us, actually, as Greek students, because it's the principal way that you can recognise a dative case because of the iota subscript. Now let's look at the plural forms. High is the plural feminine of the definite article. So that means the timai honours. The accusative plural, tas timas. The genitive plural, which it should be everybody's favourite case, because would you believe this ending, timon, timon, this ending on is always, universally, the genitive plural ending. So whatever the declension, whatever the group the noun belongs in, whatever gender it's got, whether it's a regular noun or an irregular noun, its genitive plural always ends in own, which is quite nice to have that certainty to hold on to. Tis, timais is our dative plural. One thing you'll have noticed, I hope, is that the endings of the noun rhyme with the endings of the definite article. So the word for the is hair, the ending of honour in the nominative is timer, and that can be seen throughout the table. It won't always be the case that the noun will rhyme with a definite article, but for this model noun, that is the case, and it should help you to recognise the endings and to get to grips with them. What you should ideally do is to aim to learn this table, in particular to learn the highlighted endings. But until you've learnt them, because it does take time, have a copy of the table ready at hand so that you can use it as a reference if you're reading some Greek. Now I'm going to do the same table, this time with the second declension, and you'll see some similarities, some patterns between the two. So once again we divide between the singular and the plural because there's a separate set of endings for each, and we're going to make our 4 rows for the 4 cases which we're going to be focusing on, which are the nominative for the subject of a sentence, the accusative for the object of a sentence, the genitive, which means of or belonging to, and the dative, which means to or for, and has in fact quite a few other uses as well. Now, the second declension nouns which we're using at the moment are all masculine. There are a few, in fact, which are neuter, a different gender, but we're leaving those aside for the moment. So I'm going to give you the masculine word for the to go with each noun. And that, in the nominative singular, is ho. Don't forget, by the way, to say that rough breathing, h, before the letter when you read it aloud. It's a mistake commonly made by students when they're beginning Greek to just ignore the breathing. They think, oh, we don't really need those. You do. It's ho, it's not o. The word which we're going to use as our model word is logos, the word. And here it is in the accusative case, ton logon. The genitive, which means of the word, is to of the, and logu. And if you're practicing your writing, do notice, I'm trying to make clear here, that we have to distinguish between the nu at the end of the accusative and the upsilon at the end of the genitive. So make your nu very pointy at the edge and your upsilon very rounded. When it gets to the dative, you'll see a familiar feature, which is underneath the final vowel, in both the article and in the noun ending, we have an iota subscript. As I say, it really is the feature by which many people recognise the dative. And the plural. So we start with the masculine nominative plural of the definite article, which is hoi, and the plural ending of the noun logos is logoi. The accusative plural is tous and logus. The genitive plural, I promised you, would always end in omega nu, and this one, of course, doesn't disappoint. None of them do. That's the beauty of the genitive plural in Greek. It's always own, tone, logon. Finally, the dative plural ends in ois, tois we have, and logois. So that is your model for the Greek word logos, meaning word. All the different forms of it that you might find, and all the different cases laid out. And again, like the first declension, it's worth learning it. Now, you should see, I hope, if you put this together with the first declension, certain patterns, certain similarities between the two declensions. For example, the iota subscript that you always get in the dative that makes it look so pretty. The fact that the nominative plural ends in an iota in both the two declensions. Or the accusative ends in a nu in the singular and a sigma in the plural. The dative plurals are similar as well, either ending in ice for the first declension or ois for the second. So find out those similarities as you learn them, as it will help you to get on top of them more quickly. Well, there's been a lot of grammar there, so it's time now to put some of that into practice. Here are a few sentences, and the common feature to each sentence is I've used the same noun, strategos, in each one. Well, strategos is a noun we've seen before, and I thought it might be time to just focus on the word just a little bit. Strategos means general, and it's actually a mixture of two Greek words. There is stratos, which means army, and there is the verb ago, which we met earlier in the lesson, which means I lead. So, if you put those words together, the general is an army leader. And here is a picture of one of Athens' more famous generals, Themistocles. Well, the word strategos appears in each of these examples, and each time the word is used in a different case. So here's an opportunity to practice different cases. Have a look at the first one. Hos strategos graphe tas epistolas. Hos strategos is the nominative, and that's used for the subject of the verb. We'll start with the general. And what does he do? He writes. Use the present tense here. And tas, which is one of our definite article words, means the. Epistolas means letters. By the way, although we've met the definite article, we haven't met any word for the indefinite article. That's the word for a or an. Supposing I just wanted to say the general writes a letter, or to keep it plural, the general writes letters, some letters. Well, to do that, I would simply get rid of the definite article. So without it, it means the general writes letters. Let's have a look at the second example. This begins with the nominative plural word, the slaves, hoi douloi. The slaves, agousi. Now this is a verb which we just saw a moment ago at the bottom of this screen. The slaves lead. Now, what follows next? One of the definite articles for the. Now another definite article meaning the. Hang on, English can't have the. What's going on here? We need to apply the case endings. Well, the second word for the is actually a genitive. So the genitive must always be translated with the word of before it. So, the of the. Strategu, that's also genitive. This of the general obviously go together. And I got one word left, hippon, which means horse. Now we need to unscramble the word order here a little bit, because clearly I can't write the slaves lead the of the general horse. But if I, instead of saying of the general, I wrote the generals using an apostrophe S, it now makes more sense in English. The general's horse. Now I could apply some colour coding to this. If I colour code the two accusative words, that's the definite article ton and the noun hippon, meaning horse, in yellow. And let's say we use green for the two genitive words, to strategu. We can see that we've got a bit of a sandwich structure with the words ton and hippon on the outsides and to strategu in the middle. And this is a typical feature of a Greek sentence where the genitive, article and noun sit in between another article and noun. We call it the genitive sandwich, and you'll see that more often in Greek. Now let's move on to the third and last sentence here. Well, we begin this time with ho angelos, which means the messenger, And the messenger does what messengers do well. He announces. Ton logon, we know, is the word, but here I'll probably say the story, the tale, the account. Be flexible when you're translating that word logon. I quite like account. It suggests that he's giving a news bulletin. Now I've got the word general again, but this time I've got a dative plural ending. So I'm going to say to the generals. And I hope that's shown you how the case endings are used to give particular meanings to each word in each different sentence. We'll finish with a game. On the right, you can see 5 Greek expressions. They're not sentences, they're just phrases. Each one uses an example of a genitive case and also an example of a nominative case. Each of those expressions or phrases goes with one of the pictures on the left. But you can see that there's one expression left over, because there are 5 Greek expressions, only 4 pictures. So your job is to try to match each expression to a picture and work out which one is left over and to translate each of them. Now, I suggest that you pause the video while you have a go at it, because I'm now going to go over the answers. Well, if we look at the Greek expressions first of all, the top one is ho to strategu hippos, the horse of the general, or the general's horse. Now, if you look at the pictures, there's only one that it can be, which is picture D. Picture D, in fact, is a statue of Alexander, the Greek general Alexander, mounting his horse Bucephalus. So we will match 1 with D. The second expression is her tes Athenes Sophia, the of Athena wisdom, or in better English, Athena's wisdom, or the wisdom of Athena. I might say wisdom of Athene. Now I'm going to match that with B, because B is a statue of Athene. Three, ho to theologos. Well, that's the word of God, literally the word of the God, but remember that Greek likes to use the definite article more often than we use it in English. So to say the word of God is a good translation for that, especially if you're reading New Testament Greek. So I'm going to match 3 to picture C. 2 more Greek expressions left, only 1 more picture. The picture that's left is a picture of A, and that's a picture of a battle. And in fact, although it may not be clear from that battle, it's a picture of the Battle of Marathon. And this is an Athenian victory, so it's hair, tone athenaion, niker, belongs with that. Now you haven't yet met the word athenaion, which means of the Athenians, but you do know that hair niker means victory. So a bit of educated guesswork can match together 4 and D. That means that 5 is the odd one out. There's no picture for this. What does it mean? The of the messenger, or I'll say the messengers, slaves. And well done if you got those right.